So if you asked me when everything changed, I would probably say a few days before Passover. That is when daily life was disrupted, when shops started closing and it didn't even feel safe to be out on the street at all times. That is when people began to wonder what would become of the city that they loved so much. A few days before Passover, people started dying in tragic numbers. Is this our story from New York City in 2020? It sounds like it, but no. It's actually the story of the Jews of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. A few days before Passover in that year, the Roman army attacked the Jews who were living autonomously in Jerusalem. And after 4 months of warfare, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple and captured the Holy City. This event marked the end of a significant period in Jewish history. It was the end of the temple cult. The temple had been the central institution of the Jewish community. There, the high priests would offer sacrifices to God on holy days like Yom Kippur. There, Jews from all around would make pilgrimages on festivals like Sukkot, which we'll celebrate in a week. But the temple wasn't only a religious institution. It also served political and economic functions. The Jews of Jerusalem would go to the temple to have court cases adjudicated by the Great Sanhedrin and to shop at the local market. As the Roman-Jewish War proceeded, hundreds of thousands of people died and all of these central institutions around the temple shut down. The Jews who survived were forced out of the city, beginning the second major exilic period. It must have felt to them like the end of the world. The notion of exile appears frequently in Judaism. We saw a bit of it in the second part of Ahava Rabbah, which we prayed today. And in a traditional Amidah, there is a prayer that Jews in exile will be returned to Zion. Surely it's this notion of exile that motivates many people today to move to the state of Israel. But for us, as Jews who have chosen to live in America and build our community here, it can be hard to relate to the concept of exile. Except, I would suggest that we have some insight into that experience now. No, we did not just have a war, but since a few days before Passover last year, all of our lives have been disrupted. We have witnessed a global tragedy in which 1 million people have died thus far, sometimes hitting very close to home. Many of us were displaced from our homes, whether because of a need for childcare for little ones, or a loss of income, or simply because it didn't feel safe there. We've also been shut out of the institutions that form the very center of our lives, workplaces, volunteer organizations, and, like the ancient Israelites, our temples. Add to all of this the looming crises in politics, the environment, and human rights. But there's another, maybe deeper level on which our experience, I think, is parallel to that of the Jews in 70 CE. Because when the temple was destroyed and the Jews fled Jerusalem, they weren't just cut off from their way of life. They worried that they would be cut off from God. After all, they believed that the temple was God's place on earth, and they made offerings as a way to communicate with God there. So with the loss of that sacrificial system, the Jews worried that they would also lose their connection to the divine. Now, we might not think of God in the same way, but many of us do experience what I would call divinity through human relationships. Whether it's the sense that someone loves you unendingly, or the faith you feel in a trusted friend, or even the fleeting connection that comes from sharing a smile with a stranger. For me, sitting in a packed room at CBE on Friday night, surrounded by other people's voices raised in song, it brings a feeling of transcendence, like I am lifted out of my mind and body and part of a collective energy. All of these experiences, unending love, faith, connection, and transcendence, they are all ways that we can experience an element of the divine in our lives. The divinity of human relationships is at the root of Martin Buber's theology. For Buber, an individual is only fully actualized when wholly relating to another being. In his book, I and Thou, Buber writes that the relation to a human being is the proper metaphor for the relation to God. In each moment of genuine connection, he says, we glimpse something eternal, quote, beholding and being beheld, recognizing and being recognized, loving and being loved, exist as an actuality that cannot be lost. But over the past 6 months of our social isolation, these actualities might not have been lost, but they've been much harder to find. We've walked the streets fearing other people and feeling anxious when we got too close. We wear masks that make it impossible for us to see each other's smiles. So many of our interactions take place on digital media, where it is literally impossible to make eye contact. I'm trying to stare at this dot so that you will feel as if I'm looking in your eyes. The eyes are the window to the soul, and I truly believe that without the ability to behold each other, we lose something sacred. For those of us who find divinity in relationship, if this resonates with you, I think that living in isolation is an experience of spiritual exile. This social distance will continue to be necessary to protect the public health, and we have to do our part, but I am growing weary of it. The ancient Israelites used to gather at the temple on Yom Kippur. We used to gather at temples or industrial spaces in downtown Brooklyn on Yom Kippur. This is a great adaptation, the Zoom thing, but it's not how Judaism or life was meant to be. For a while, I was stuck there. I thought, okay, maybe that's the sermon. We're in exile and it sucks. But then my friend advised me that that was a little bit depressing, and she was right. So I looked back to the year 70 CE, and I found that what comes next is actually quite inspiring. After fleeing Jerusalem, many Jews moved west to a city called Yavne. There, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai set up an academy where rabbis gathered to radically re-envision their society. Without a temple, the rabbis instituted daily prayer as a replacement for sacrifice, and a new channel to the divine was opened. The rabbis also established Torah study and mitzvot as core components of what it meant to be Jewish in diaspora. Many of the traditions passed down to us actually began not in temple times, but in this period of creativity and innovation. The rabbis weren't just trying to recreate their old ways of life. They were also looking with a critical eye at the issues that had plagued their Second Temple society, because temple times were not ideal. In fact, there were deep divisions among Jews who fell into various sects, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and others. Each of these sects believed that they had access to absolute truth, and they vied for power. Looking back on that time, the rabbis actually wrote that God allowed for the destruction of the Second Temple because there had been baseless hatred among Jews. Though they were surely mourning the destruction of Jerusalem, the rabbis at Yavne saw the situation as an opportunity for a fresh start. Instead of division, they stressed unity, which meant valuing multiple perspectives. It is this rabbinic culture that produced the Mishnah and later the Talmud, replete as they are with discussion and debate more than clear-cut answers. The Talmud famously says of a disagreement between sages, these and those are the words of God. These ancient Jews did not sit around and mourn their exile for very long. Instead, they rebuilt their lives and found new ways to connect to divinity. They created new norms and established new laws in order to improve on what had come before. So maybe we can take this precedent to heart. Coronavirus has caused much disruption and longing. But like the destruction of the Second Temple, maybe that experience can provide us with a fresh start. As we slowly emerge out of the crisis, we have an opportunity to rethink old patterns and envision a new way of being. Isn't this what Yom Kippur is all about? A forced pause to reflect and change course. We can do this, I think, on a personal level, because this time took so much away, but in that we probably gained some new insight into ourselves. What did we appreciate in the last 6 months? The simpler schedule, having extended time with family, or maybe just getting enough sleep. And what do we really yearn for? To hug our friends, to welcome them into our homes. Maybe you even miss standing next to a stranger on the subway and smiling at them and having no fear. Then there are all the ways we'd like to improve ourselves that we think about on Yom Kippur. So as our lives begin to resume again, we can be intentional about what we choose to bring back, what we try to leave behind, and who we strive to be. On a societal level, the way that the rabbis radically re-envisioned communal norms and laws can be an inspiration for us. We have had more time than usual to reflect recently on what is broken in our society. Coronavirus revealed inequalities of life and death proportions. And one of the most important things to come out of this time has been the increased awareness of racism in our society, thanks to the work of the movement for Black Lives. The ancient rabbis looked at their community and saw baseless hatred among fellows. When we look at ours, we have to continue to critically reassess and maintain our energy to rebuild differently. As we look ahead at the coming year, let's not talk about going back to normal, though I find myself saying it. Instead, I want to think about moving forward. What would it take for us to live in such a way that we honor the divinity of human relationships? What can we create now that will benefit others in generations to come? Gemar Chatima Tova, may we each be sealed into the book of life this year, and may we feel empowered to write the next chapter.